Okay, we've successfully installed HTTPS. We're using SSL, but let's see how we can make sure every time the user visits our site, we make sure they're using HTTPS. So I come to my code, I'm in cookie cache. We're going to look at login form.php. Okay, login form.php, it's going to be the same. But one thing I didn't get to talk about is this error message. In the previous videos, we actually set this error variable in another PHP file. But what's cool about PHP is when I set a global variable, it's going to be accessible throughout the site as long as the site's in the same directory. Okay, so here I can access error even though there is no error variable defined, but I defined it in the other file called login.php. Login sets this error. If it's true, then I'm going to print the error message on top of the login form, which is what you saw earlier. So when I clicked the wrong username, it said error, invalid username. Okay, and that's where this error is displayed. We're using jQuery UI error message, which looks really nice. Login form looks the same. The main action is going to be here in the login.php. You'll see the code that we've written before. We grab the cookie, see if they logged in. If they haven't, see if that's from our login form. If it is, check the username and password, set the cookie, and redirect them to page 1. The one thing we want to do is make sure we do a HTTPS redirect. So in cookie cache, we were adding two things. One, we're going to add an HTTPS redirect on the login, but also on page 1 and page 2. Also, we'll set headers in the HTTPS request on page 1 and 2 telling the browser not to cache the page's content. First, let's start out with this HTTPS redirect. To do that, we want to make sure the server is running HTTPS. So they actually have a server super global variable, and we're going to check HTTPS here. If HTTPS is not equivalent to on, then we're going to redirect them. So I'll have a redirect URL. I'll make sure I put HTTPS in the URL. I'll concatenate that with my server's HTTP host, okay, which is the host name, as well as the server's request URI. You'll see the periods here, so I'm concatenating strings. Once the URL is built, we will go ahead and redirect them using a header. We'll change the header's location to our redirect URL that we just created. And then, of course, exit this code. We don't want to continue executing this code using HTTP. Here's my HTTPS redirect. And we're going to want to copy and paste this on all of our pages. This will ensure that they're using HTTPS throughout our site. Okay, so I'll come here, I'll go to page 1. I'll also add an HTTPS redirect at the top of page 1 as well as on the top of page 2. So I copied it from login and pasted it into page 1 and page 2. Now wait a second here. Header should be blue. So I put a $sign there. Make sure you take the $sign out on each of them. Okay, you'll also see in the header, if the user is authorized to view this hidden content, we're going to display it. But before we do, we want to set these headers to prevent caching. So you can see here I'm doing cache control. I'm saying no store, no cache, must reevaluate, pre-check, must revalidate, pre-check, post-check, max age. Make sure that we don't cache and it expires. Okay, basically browsers cache the content by default. It's going to make the page much more efficient by making it faster to load web apps. But it's not always the desired behavior, especially true when the content contains sensitive information like bank account records or different bills or addresses, social security numbers. Okay, we want to make sure the browser does not cache this hidden content. So we can see if this page runs. We'll upload all the code, come back to the browser, go back to the user authentication lecture. Okay, you'll see I'm using HTTPS, but just for a test, let's use HTTP and see if it'll redirect us. So I'll open up cookie cache and open up login. Okay, you'll see it redirected us to HTTPS. I do test, pass, do a submit. You see I'm using HTTPS, go to page 1, page 2, do a log out. We'll watch the cookie being set. So I go to application data and look at the cookies. So if I type the wrong username password, okay, I'll get an error message. If I type it correctly, it's going to let me in. Here's the cookie being set, cookie still set, log out. Okay, here if I try to do a URL hack, doesn't let me. If I try to do a URL hack on page 2, doesn't let me. If I log in, I'm on page 1 and I try to take off this HTTPS, just do HTTP, redirects me to HTTPS, same on page 2, try to take HTTPS off, redirects me, and it's not caching my page. So every time I load the page, it's loading it from scratch. So if I change the code frequently, Chrome's not going to cache it. You can also achieve this result using incognito mode. I always use incognito mode when developing. That way when I change the site and change it frequently, it'll show the changes that I'm applying. Okay, in the next lecture, we'll look at session variables. So please continue to the next lecture so you can see how to do a login with sessions.